Chinese President Xi Jinping and his American counterpart Donald Trump agreed that cooperation is the only correct choice for the two countries during Trump's visit to China. Are we going to see closer China-US ties in the coming years? China and the US have different views on many issues, including the South China Sea and the DPRK nuclear issue. So, in what ways could bilateral military relations serve as a stabilizing factor in China-US ties? In October, the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee passed the Taiwan Travel Act, which calls for the complete lifting of restrictions on high-level visits between the U.S. and Taiwan. Why does the U.S. continue to play the Taiwan card? President Xi Jinping pledged to make sure that by 2020, the PLA will achieve basic mechanization and become a top-tier military by 2050. What impact will a stronger Chinese military have on regional security? Through strategic head of state diplomacy, China and the U.S. are working together to draw a roadmap for robust future bilateral ties. The aim is to increase mutual trust on military relations and diffuse doubts on major and sensitive issues. Remaining challenges include differing approaches to the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue, the so-called free navigation of the South China Sea, and Taiwan. What do the military ties mean to both countries and the region at large? How are China and the U.S. relations likely to develop under Presidents Xi and Trump? And how do Western powers and China's neighbors view the country's vigorous military build-up? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, Director from Center for Security Cooperation at Office for International Military Cooperation, Ministry of National Defense, and Anna Tangen, author and columnist. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our dialogue. Well, President Trump, for the first time, used a novel phrase like open and free Indo-Pacific region. Did he imply India, which increasingly becomes a strategic competitor and geopolitically a danger for the Indian Ocean, where freedom of navigation becomes such a major stake for our economic development? What do you think of the implications of using this novel phrase by President Donald Trump?
Well, this might be the first novel phrase used by him, but actually this concept itself is nothing new because this has been talked about for the last 5 years or so. But there are a lot of discussion as to what it really implies. So just by talking about this concept itself, definitely it demonstrates a kind of link between the two oceans in the world. But the fact is the United States is also engaging India in an unprecedented manner. But it is also India's interest in recent years not only to look east, but to act east. So India actually is really looking in this direction. But how would they cooperate, but not in a damaging way to the interest of other country? That remains a question, and it has to be seen in the future.
It's been a tradition for newly elected president in the United States to adopt a policy of anything but the previous one. Anything but Bush, anything but Clinton, this time around anything but Obama. Do you think the use of Indo-Pacific region aims to keep a distance from back to Asia during the Trump administration?
Well, quite frankly, Donald Trump is not very well versed in the niceties here that the Colonel was talking about. If you really go back, this was a term that was pushed forward by Shinzo Abe as he was trying to put this kind of quadrilateral alliance against the United States out there. Now, the U.S. actions are based on a 2010 white paper. I mean, literally, that was the last time they addressed this. And what they came up with was that India would be a doorstop to China expansionism. They would use inevitable tensions that would crop up between China and India as China starts to increase its trade routes around the world and not invade, but be part of the trade routes in there. Now, there's two ways to look at this. All right, this is either a threat to India or it's an opportunity. And that's the real question about what the Belt and Road can do for this. Because you're not looking merely at strategic issues of military importance. What you're doing here is looking at the economics of the future of Asia.
India has always been an integral part of Asia. Therefore, the alleged novel mention of Indo-Pacific region comes as nothing new, according to the spokesperson of the Trump administration. Having said this, do you think the very first use of Indo-Pacific region has added one more dimension to the traditional geopolitical scenario between the United States and China? This broad picture includes actually the Korean Peninsula, Diaoyu Islands, Taiwan Strait, and the South China Sea. We have to include the Indian Ocean, where Malabar joint naval exercise took place between the three major militaries, India, Japan, and the United States. Is that part of the advocacy by Prime Minister Churi Koizumi, who first came up with the idea of building an arc of freedom and prosperity between democracies, rejecting the Chinese military presence in this key area?
No, I don't think there will be a direct confliction of interest between China and India, even in the Indian Ocean. The point is as China's national interests grow, it actually has spilled over very much to the rimland of the Indian Ocean. We probably have more than 1 million Chinese people working in different countries, and the Chinese Navy has been operating in the Gulf of Aden since the end of 2006, and we have a logistics supply station in Djibouti. So China's relationship with India in the Indian Ocean is not a competitive one. I have actually written an article a long time ago to argue that if the Pacific Ocean is not enough to accommodate both China and the United States, the Indian Ocean is also big enough to accommodate China and India. So many people talk about how the Indians would have a joint exercise with Japan, with the United States in the Indian Ocean, as if it is really against China. But I can also give you some other examples of how India actually helped Chinese fishing ships in the Indian Ocean. When we were conducting counter-piracy operation, the Indian actually sent a petroleum aircraft to rescue China's ship called the Fu City. So this kind of things should be encouraged. And China, likewise, have also helped the Indian merchant ships transiting through Indian Ocean. So it's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah, and I'd add on that, you have mechanisms already in place like SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where everybody's working together. But the thing we haven't mentioned here, which is the real stone in the shoe of this particular relationship, is China's relationship with Pakistan. Now, interestingly enough, India has now suddenly warmed up to this idea of possibly looking at the Belt and Road. They've actually been saying that there should be a Sino-Indo spur of the road, which would be in essence competitive to the Pakistani corridor. So if that in fact does happen, I think there are a lot of opportunities to settle border disputes, because now instead of seeing each other as threats, they see each other as opportunities.
You saw all smiles on the face of President Trump during his 3-day stay in Beijing, the first official visit of this kind since he took office. But when he was delivering a speech at the Asia-Pacific leaders meeting, he used a different term, addressing the audience in Hanoi. For example, the two sides, Hanoi and Washington, should join hand in meeting the challenges from the territorial disputes in the South China Sea. At the same time, President Xi Jinping said in his bilateral meeting with his American counterpart that the male-to-male ties should be viewed as a stabilizing factor in rebuilding trust between the major countries like Washington and Beijing. What do you think of the message that President Xi Jinping delivered?
Well, it's very interesting for you to observe that in the high-level talks, the summit talks between Chinese leadership and American leadership, they would always talk about the military relationship. This is not the case with other countries. When Chinese leaders met with leaders of other countries, they seldom talk about military relationship. This is the only exception, and which tells how important the military relationship can be and how it is actually affecting the health growth of other relationships. Because if you talk about the economy, well, there could be a deficit and this kind of things which should be resolved through economic negotiations. But talking about the military relationship, China has really have some grudge, because it's the United States which has actually laid the barriers on this kind of mill-to-mill relationship as early as 2000, when the United States actually enacted the so-called Defense Authorization Act, which restricted PLA exchanges with American counterpart in 12 fields, and they coming to China's exclusive economic zone and South China Sea for their reconnaissance. We are not doing any harm to the United States. So this is how a Chinese would look at this relationship, and how the U.S. how the U.S. should improve this relationship, first of all, starting from its own side.
Well, I see it from a pragmatic view a little bit differently. I'd flip your argument around and say you have two countries with very different political, economic, and social structures and cultures, right? And the fact is they're right now more divergent than they have been in the past under past U.S. presidents. So what I think both sides need to do is make sure that there's not enough friction that would start a war, which would be devastating to both sides. So I think it's very practical. It says, look, we can't agree on the future. You have your future, I have my future. They don't necessarily coincide, but we both agree we do not need to fight. And I think this is the main thing that I get from this, increase the mill-to-mill.
Well, I just can't agree more with you on this point, because if you want me to describe my best hope is this mill-to-mill relationship with one word, I would just say manageable. So long as it is manageable with all those CBMs in place, so long as we do not fight with each other, that is fine. And that is exactly the progress we have made over years. Why the United States would start to have so many CBMs with China? Because now you have grown up. So, and I show my respect to your growing strengths. So that is why I would like to have this kind of mechanism with you, as I did with the Soviet Union in the Cold War. But because the China-US relationship is not between two enemies, therefore I have more confidence in this relationship between China and the US.
One more question about the mill-to-mill ties between Washington and Beijing. Everybody understands what it means to have three major aircraft carrier strike groups converging at the same time in this volatile region of East Asia, with the DPRK, of course, being first and foremost the top target on the radar of the American armed forces and their allies, South Korea and Japan. What will be the basic attitude of the PLA armed forces towards any dramatic development on the Korean Peninsula? China calls for, a suspension for suspension, calling for both the United States and DPRK to suspend their missile tests, nuclear tests, and military exercises. On our doorsteps, war clouds are gathering very quickly.
Well, China's call basically fall on deaf ears. That is true. But I think probably it will take some time for the U.S. side to consider what else could you achieve if you do not resort to the only way, that is peaceful negotiation. Right? Because if you look at the DPRK, well, all the nuclear facilities are within 100 kilometers away from Chinese border, and about 70% of its conventional arms are just congregated along the 38th parallel. So if this is A and B, if you strike on A, B could respond. If you strike on B, A could respond. So so that means should there be a war at all, there can't be a small conflict. It will be a major war. It will be catastrophic for everybody. So nobody will be winner. So that is why we insist, and President Trump agree on this trip, that peaceful negotiation is the only way out.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You are watching Dialogue with the Senior Colonel Zhou Bo and Anna Tang, and we're discussing the implications of China's military build-up in the broader picture of U.S.-China relationship. We addressed this issue in the wake of President Trump's recent 3-day official visit to China. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Well, with the recent change in attitude of the ROK about deployment of the THAAD, do you think we're going to see silver lining of a major crisis on our doorstep? Because this missile shield program is said to be a very serious threat to our strategic missile balance in this area. Do you think we have been able to defuse the crisis, or is just the beginning of the end game?
Okay, let's straighten this thing out for once. This was never about the ability of South Korea to defend itself with missiles. What it was about was a radar system that comes with it, which is able to penetrate far into Chinese sources, now Chinese areas. Now there's a comfort level, and there are some protocols that the South Koreans have said that they're going to go along with, which has allied concerns in Beijing. So going forward, they're not going to add more of these types of missiles. But China has never said you shouldn't be able to defend yourself. They just said don't fall into the situation where you're becoming part of a kind of a nuclear strike deal for the United States. The real concern here is, as you pointed out, that there's an armed encounter that's planned. They're, believe me, over the many years that we've talked about, they have been playing scenarios in their head, what they can do, how to strike A and B simultaneously, this, that, and the other thing. The fact is, there's no way you can get away from what it was one of the generals said, 40,000 casualties minimum, civilian. That would be in South Korea and Seoul.
And if the hostilities go nuclear, the first casualty would be put at 1 million.
Yes, but let's be clear, though. For the U.S., I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, there is a bright red line. And that bright red line is that a nuclear-armed North Korea with a delivery system that is being bellicose towards the U.S. cannot be tolerated. It won't. Politically, Donald Trump would be out. Any president who allows that would be out. Look at what happened to Obama when he drew his line in the sand in Syria and didn't follow through. This is not something that they can toy with, and this is the problem that China has.
Gentlemen, the DPRK has remained quiet for at least 1 month throughout the whole of October without conducting any missile or nuclear tests, perhaps with a clear awareness about the imminent military strikes on the doorsteps. Having said this, Senior Colonel Zhou, what do you think of the 3-no policy by Moon Jae-in, the newly elected president of ROK? He draws a red line. He wants to give the PLA armed forces a big relief, saying we're not going to be part of the anti-China missile shield program. We'll not be part of the treaty alliance between the United States, Japan, and South Korea targeting China. And there's a third article. So what do you think of the 3-no policy? Do you think this indicates the beginning of a building trust between ROK and China?
I think this is a new start, and the spokesman in English Foreign Affairs just mentioned that he has taken notice of such expression rather than giving any positive comment on this kind of position, because formally speaking, we are still opposed to THAAD because we believe it's not useful at all. So what's the use of such a missile system against a so-called rain of shower, So the DPRK has always threatened to put Seoul into a sea of fire. So that is not useful. It's just a kind of paranoia. It's just a kind of security populism. So the question is, why would you do it at all?
Well, President Moon Jae-in promised to freeze this nuclear, missile shield program, at least at the moment. But what do you think of the recent approval by some of the lawmakers, or recent proposal by some of the lawmakers in the D.C. to raise the level of the Taiwan Travel Act, which encourages senior level personnel exchange, particularly military personnel, between Taiwan and the United States of America? Do you think this has drawn immediate protest from the PLA?
Yes, of course, because this actually came in the wake of another bill, that is 2018, and that the Defense Authorization Act, which allows the Taiwanese and American ships to visit each other, and before that, in 2017, it allows the senior defense officials at deputy minister level to visit each other. So there are always some people in Capitol Hill who would want to sow some seeds of discord between China and U.S. From time to time, They would just try to just make you living uncomfortable. But I just wonder whether this kind of things could really pass. But talking about NDAA...
Are you suggesting that President Trump is likely to veto this resolution?
No. Well, the problem...
Kind of
no,
no way.
The problem is, even if President Trump vetoed, say, 2018 NDAA, the Congress can still, by 2/3 votes, just make it
They wouldn't get 2/3 vote. It's up there preliminary. Right now, you have a situation where a lot of politicals are trying to stand stall, especially the Republican side. They've had a lot of scandals. There's a lot of issues going on. Everyone wants to seize the flag and wrap themselves in and said, we'll deal with who we want. Taiwan is our friend, all of this type of thing. But they're playing with fire. These are people who are largely not schooled or understand very much about the relationship between China, U.S., and China. So, I mean, not China, mainland. So when you start looking at these things, it's very, very bothersome that you have happy amateurs who are trying to make political points instead of understanding the realities of what they're playing with.
With the inauguration of the Trump administration, Republicans and Democrats across the aisle have both started the process of reassessing China, given the so-called Thucydides trap discourse. Now, this guy, very senior military official from the Pentagon, Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, said recently Russia might be the immediate threat to the U.S. national security at this moment, but China potentially will be the biggest geopolitical rival. Has that ruffled your feather? Do you think this is something that is to truly upset policymakers of the PLA and national security group?
Well, this doesn't appear to be what he said when he was visiting China about 2 months ago. During his visit to China, he talked about the importance of the DPRK issue, and he also pledged to foster this male-to-male relationship, and we also have a great expectation for the upcoming strategic talk at a new mechanism, that is the talk at the joint staff department, which will be there in November, and we're also going to have another HADR exercise. So probably, having realized that we have some problem, it is necessary for us to talk about the common understanding and to try to enhance our common understanding and cooperation, rather than talking about someone who you have just talked 3 months ago of becoming another rival or competitor.
Well, there's a nuance to it. First off, he didn't say military. I think the U.S. sees China Russia as a potential military rival, much less than China. China is an economic rival. But there's an old adage that goes, battles are won by generals, but wars are won by economies. And this is the reality that a lot of people in the U.S. are looking at. They're saying, look, Russia thinks. But the issue is that Russia and China are being pushed closer and closer together by the actions and essence of Washington. It used to be the balancing game, kind of like your romance of the three kingdoms, where each would try to keep the others from gathering against them. And right now, from the military's perspective, this is the alliance that they wanted to avoid at all costs. They didn't want Russia to get closer to China. And I think that's part of why the military has been pushing Donald Trump on this whole, okay, let's get some sort of détente with Russia, pull them away from China so that we avoid this kind of danger.
The last question is very much about the defense budget. You talked about the 2018 Authorization Act, but you were one step short of mentioning directly the importance of increasing drastically the military spending of the biggest military machine in the United States, in the world, the U.S. Armed Forces. So what do you think of this alleged arms race, which is emerging larger on the horizon of the Asia-Pacific region?
Well, I personally have some doubts as to whether President Trump would really increase military budget to that extent. He certainly talked about it. He talked about, for example, increasing American ships from 276 to 350. But the question is, where is the money? Yeah, and he tried to, slash the fund for UN, which caused an outcry in the State Department. What's the rationale of, reducing the money for such a peace initiative, a peace program, and then increase the money. And he also talked about what's the reason of increasing such military expenditure to fight against terrorists. Do you need to increase so many military ships to fight
nuclear bombs?
Terrorists? Yeah.
How are you going to fight terrorists with nuclear bombs? But I mean, Donald Trump is clearly very, very in favor of spending more money with the military. He said that going on. It's just he's pushing through a tax cut. He's going to decrease the amount of revenues that he has. And I don't think there's no combination of Republicans and Democrats who are going to say, let's borrow to fund defense. If they can put money aside from somewhere else, that's fine. But they're not going to get social cuts while you're making less butter and more arms.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. There's a popular assumption that in a bilateral relationship between the United States and China, the military is always the first to be hurt and the last to be repaired. I wonder if this is going to be repeated in the Trump administration or in the years ahead. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.